Hey y'all, I'm Hope. Welcome back to my channel, and welcome to Cursed Book Club. If you're new here, you might not know that I do run a thing with my friends where we do Cursed Book Club, which is essentially where I read a book that has very middling reviews, typically on like Goodreads, Storygraph, other kind of book review sites. But it has those middling reviews because it's rated either 5 stars or 1 stars by everyone. 1 star by everyone who has read it. And so my friends often want to know about these books. They want to know what's happening, why people have such polarizing opinions on them or polarized opinions on them, but they don't want to read it with their own 2 eyes. So I read it for them and I tell them all about it, and we have a good laugh over it. It's a lot of fun. We have a great time. And I was just about to start our next cursed book, and I thought, why not vlog it? Why not spread the fun, share it with more people? Because we have so much fun doing this, and I think it's like, it's kind of like a hate read, but it's just like, I'm here for the entertainment value, you know? I'm not here specifically to like heavily critique a book or to like hate something. I'm here because I know that it's going to be like a silly good time. So that's what we're going to be doing, and our next cursed book, or rather the first one that you'll be seeing, is Gothikana by Runix, which just came out I think at the end of last month. This one was picked up by Tor's new romantasy imprint, Bramble, though it is, I believe, a previously indie published book. And I've seen that this has like lots of 5-star reviews when I look at it on Goodreads or Storygraph, but then everyone I've actually heard talk about this book says it's terrible. And there's a few things in here specifically that I've heard about that I'm curious to see if they fixed it in the traditionally published version. But because I've heard so many terrible things about this, I did pick this as my friend and I's next cursed book, and they're very excited for it. They're ready for some silliness. I'm ready for some silliness, and that's what we're going to be doing. So we're going to be diving into this one. This will be a spoiler vlog, so just heads up, if you don't want spoilers for Gothikana, maybe click away now. This is going to be spoiler heavy. I'm going to be talking about everything in the book, because that is the point of Cursed Book Club. Before we get started, I just want to go ahead and give you a couple of content warnings and a kind of general warning beyond that. There is a lot of suicide in this book. There's also some drug use, dubious descriptions of mental health and mental illness, and lots of HIPAA violations, and also some stalking. So if any of those are going to be difficult for you, I'm going to go ahead and say this may not be a video for you, because those are very heavily used in this book, and I don't want anybody to go into this unprepared for that. My more general warning is that if you know me in real life, I'm going to be talking about some weird shit in this video, and I want you to be able to look at me in the eyes again the next time you see me, so maybe just click away now. I think that's it. Let's dive into the book. Well, it's the next day now, but I have actually sat down to read Gothikana, and I have read the 2 little prologue bits. There's these 2 very short, like couple of pages each, prologue pieces from each of the characters' childhoods that precedes the first chapter. I think the first chapter is when Corvian actually like gets her acceptance letter to go to this University of Varenmore. But the 2 little prologue chapters, really, they set a tone, and that tone is that the writing is not going to be great. And also it's all going to be very dramatic. That's the tone. So Vad grows up in an orphanage with a bunch of other little boys, and there's a creepy old blind woman there who tells him that he is going to go to a castle where no one goes, and he's going to meet someone with purple eyes, or he's going to find purple eyes. And the other little boys are like making fun of him, and you know, like, oh, maybe a freak would have purple eyes, you know, like little boys do. Also, I really there's this line that says that Vad thinks it's a mistake that this old woman, old Zelda, is allowed to stay after she's gone blind, but she's always had visions. And it says it was a mistake because she knew stuff she shouldn't know, stuff about boys she couldn't even see. So anyway, that line kind of took me out. Then Corvina's chapter begins with the black. It was the absence of color, and first of all, it's just incorrect. It's the presence of all color, actually, scientifically speaking. Actually, sorry, I just have to be obnoxious about that one. Also, Corvina knows crows. I'm not really sure what that's supposed to mean, but she knows crows, and delightfully, I'm already sensing that there might be some perhaps not great representation of mental illness, possibly, because right off the bat we get that Corvina and her mother lived at like the end of the street, and everybody kind of avoided them because her mother hears voices. Her mother doesn't speak very much, except for very occasionally she'll speak to Corvina, and she whispers to the voices as she hears the voices, which tell her to like keep Corvina away from other people and not allow her to go into town by herself or interact with other people or let her talk to other people. So that's great. And also there's a suggestion that possibly Corvina is also hearing the voices, so that's exciting. She's 10 in her prologue chapter. I think Vad is 7 or 8 in his prologue chapter. But yeah, delightful. So now I've made it to chapter 1, and I just have to point out that every single chapter has this like art here. This doesn't bother me. Every single chapter, and I looked through the book just to double check, has a stock image with a random quote on it. And looking at the quotes, they seem to have been chosen for keywords rather than like, I don't know, a thematic purpose, if that makes sense. Like the things that have been chosen are very different. This one is from Oscar Wilde's The Duchess of Padua, which is a play I believe that I haven't actually read, but that one's in there. There's lots of Dracula, lots of Carmilla, a couple of quotes from Frankenstein, but then there's also like a quote from Albert Einstein, a quote from Lovecraft, and there doesn't seem to really be like a kind of guiding purpose to the quotes. And they're always like over a stock image next to the chapter, which kind of looks honestly a little bit terrible in my opinion. But you know, no worse than the AI cover, so I guess I'm gonna live with it. It's fine. I don't know why it bothers me, but it does. It's like the layout is upsetting to me for some reason. But anyway, we're gonna actually dive into the book. I'm not just gonna judge it on its like visual features, but we are going to dive in on chapter 1 and find out about, I think this is primarily a romance, so the romance between Corvina and Vad, and Pumpkin has just arrived to help me out, so he is gonna keep me company. Okay, it's been like about 30 seconds, and depending on how I edit this, you will have just seen a clip of me making a lot of faces. I turned one page. I've gotten to bit, she gets her letter. The letter is actually reproduced. There is not a plain text version of this. This is very unfriendly to read. It's in this like cursive font, which I write in cursive every day and I can read cursive, but this is kind of hard to read, especially because they've made it much smaller than all of the other text. Also, I just want to point out a few things. One, she didn't apply to this university. She has just been randomly selected to be given a full scholarship. Weird. Suspicious at best. Then she was referred to this university by the Morning Star Psychiatric Institute. So that seems good. And then it's a 2-year undergraduate course. I'm not sure where this is intended to be set. There's a thing I know that will come up later that I'm not sure like if this is intended to be set in like the UK or the US or where exactly this is set, but I don't know of any places where there's like 2-year undergraduate courses. I've definitely heard of like 3-year ones, but if you were aware, please let me know, because this just took me off guard because I was like, it calls it an associate undergraduate course. I'm wondering if that's meaning it's supposed to be like an associate's degree, but you would go to a community college to get an associate's degree. So I'm not really sure how that's working, unless, again, it's set in a different country, but there's so far nothing that tells me where it's set. Also, for some reason, this program begins on January 5th, which is odd because most, at least, again, I'm guessing it's probably set in the US because I'm not noticing any spellings that are sticking out to me as being like kind of more British English spellings, which would normally kind of tip me off to it being set in the UK or something. So I'm not noticing anything that's really giving me that sense. So I genuinely don't know. Again, I'm just going to be basing this off of American universities because that's what I'm most familiar with. But like courses don't begin in January typically. Some graduate courses I think do in like odd circumstances or very like specific circumstances. I'm not aware of any programs that begin in like the spring semester because your typical like academic year begins in July and because it like corresponds with the fiscal year that begins in July and ends in June, I think. So I'm confused about that. And they've chosen her based on her academic records and personal history. Weird. And it says we'll give her access to some exclusive circles going forward. So that's, again, suspicious. So right off the bat, run away, Corvina. This seems very bad. This seems like you're gonna have your organs stolen or something. Like, I don't trust it. But anyway, we're starting off strong. I turned one page and I already have had to, like, wait, hang on a second. What? Okay, so I got on a call with my friends. We read a chunk of this. I have some notes to mention. But because I kept having to stop to read stuff to them and we were laughing at things, we made it to page 63 in like 3 hours. So it's an experience so far. Not much has happened at this point. Corvina has started classes. She arrives. She meets her new roommate, Jade, who ran away the year before. And we find out that that's because Jade's roommate, her previous roommate, Alyssa, committed suicide unexpectedly. And the only thing that we know about that is that Jade tells Corvina that Alyssa was having some sort of relationship with Mr. Deverell prior to her suicide. And so Jade suspects he might be involved in that situation somehow. But that happened. Jade is now back. Corvina is her new roommate. And Corvina, the first night there, hears music, goes and finds Mr. Deverell playing the piano in an attic and has a very tense, like, standoff with him, and then bolts back to her room. After that, they have their first class. It's really weird and creepy because he keeps staring at her for the whole time, and all the other students are like, oh, there's so much sexual tension there, be careful. And then she also, actually pretty much, they have their first class. Everyone's like, oh, so much sexual tension. Like, be careful, because you can't be with, they keep reiterating that, like, you can't have relationships with a teacher. This is, like, one of the major rules. We're not actually given a list of rules, but this is, like, one of the major rules of Barrymore. Which, like, as it should be. But she, like, a few days later walks out into the woods, which you're not really supposed to do because it's dangerous and people get lost in there. But she's really comfortable with woods, so she walks out in the woods and finds this pond, or this lake, actually. And she follows, like, a crow to get there. And she's standing out there, and she suddenly hears a voice behind her. And it's Mr. Deverell. And he's like, aren't you scared? And she's like, should I be? And he's like, yes, the woods are dangerous, and I could have been anyone. I could have done anything to you, and no one would have known. And it's like, excuse me? Like, he follows her into the forest and threatens her, and then leaves. And then she has another class with a guy who also keeps staring at all the girls in the class in, like, a creepy way. And I think it's, like, he's supposed to be creepy, but the book is not getting that it's also creepy that Mr. Deverell is doing it, that he is staring at the girls in his class, and he apparently has a long-running history of having relationships with the girls in his class, because he was with Alyssa prior to her apparent suicide, and there was another girl who went missing 5 years ago who was also with him at the time. So he seems like he might be a serial killer. I know he can't possibly, because, like, there's a whole romance thing happening here. But to turn to my notes, there's a very uncomfortable emphasis throughout the book on sheltered naivete, because we keep getting all this stuff about how Corvina rarely uses the internet. She doesn't have a cell phone. She's never been in a car, or she's very rarely been in cars before. She's, like, not comfortable with them. And so she's just very sheltered and naive. Most of her understanding of relationships comes from reading romances, and in particular she names romances where the men tend to be, like, very aggressive and, like, claim they're women. So that is her, like, understanding of relationships. So there's a lot of emphasis on the naivete aspect. And then Barrymore seems super scammy because no one knows about it. It doesn't exist. You can't Google it. She tried. She went to the library and tried to Google it. And it has the same vibe. One of my friends pointed out it has, like, the same vibe as, like, you need to send this prince money so that he can, like, I don't know, get out of jail or something. Like, those scammy emails you get asking you for money. And so it just seems super creepy. But then she starts to go, and, like, people are like, oh yeah, there's a lot of rumors that, like, people go missing, and, like, every 5 years somebody goes missing from Barrymore, and, like, there's all these creepy things about it. And the vibes are that she is about to have her organs harvested, because she goes to a place that nobody knows about. Nobody knows she's going there. She's extremely socially vulnerable. We also find she's been treated for some sort of psychiatric condition. I think the way it's being described, it sounds like it's probably schizophrenia, but she's like hearing voices and things like that. She's had psychiatric treatment. Also, to that point, Barrymore gets her name from the Morning Star Psychiatric Institute, which, first of all, Lucifer Psychiatric Institute is kind of the vibe there, because the Morning Star. But like, also HIPAA violations. I don't know where this is supposed to be set. There is no information on like where this is supposed to be set precisely, but HIPAA violations. Her personal information was given out by a medical institution. Absolutely the fuck not. So that's one thing. Barrymore seems scammy, seems really suspicious. Then she meets Jade. Jade also seems suspicious because she immediately starts love bombing Corvina, and she like is immediately like super nice to her and like, oh, you have such cool eye color and your smile is really great, and like, let's be friends, let's room together. And Corvina has known this girl for like 10 minutes, and now it keeps going on about how this is her friend Jade. She cares about Jade's pain because Jade is telling her about her previous roommate Alyssa's suicide. And we find out that Jade was with this guy Troy, who Jade now has this like antagonistic relationship with after Alyssa's suicide. But Troy keeps getting called Troy the asshole, but he seems to actually be a pretty nice guy. Like, he's certainly like friendly towards Corvina and like is giving her advice. He chats with her at meals. Like, he's clearly not an asshole, but like he keeps getting referred to as an asshole, which I don't quite understand. And the other thing is that we don't have a whole lot of like different characters. It's primarily focusing on Corvina, Jade, Troy, and Vad. But there's a lot of really weird gender stuff happening. We keep getting a lot of stuff about how the girls are like so feminine. Jade wears like all these pastels and things, and she's feminine and her nails are pink. And the Corvina, she's kind of goth. She wears like mostly black and dark colors, but she always wears like flowy skirts, and she's just so short and so slight and small. And Vad is so big and tall and wide and broad, and he commands the room, and he has a masculine gravelly voice. And voices invariably described as either being masculine or feminine. Doesn't matter if it's a character we've already seen before. If it's just like somebody will say something near her and like the masculine voice or the feminine voice, this, that, and the other. So there's just like a lot of weird gender stuff. Like, it's all about like feminine pretty girls and big masculine men, and it's kind of giving me the creeps, if I'm honest. So that keeps happening. We're halfway through the note. Great. And I'm 60 pages into the book. What else? Oh, also, the school does not operate like a university. They keep going about like there's not really a curfew, but like people stay in their dorms at night. It's like at a university you would not be expected to be inside at a certain time. Like, you're an adult, you do your thing. They seem to be offering a very weird degree. Also, it doesn't quite make sense because they say that you can like go to another university to finish your bachelor's degree if you want, or you can finish the degree at Varenmore. But if Varenmore doesn't really exist, who is going to accept that credential? There are professors that come to Varenmore to teach and then go out in the world to teach elsewhere. But who is going to accept those credentials if the school doesn't legally exist, or at least is like completely hidden, like nobody can find it? Like, if you can't Google it, who is going to accept that as a credential on your CV or on your transcript? Like, it doesn't make any sense. The classes don't make sense. The doors are like labeled. So like, first year English is always taught in the same room. That is not a university. I think the author's note mentions that the author based this in part on her experience at a boarding school, and it very much feels like something that was set at a boarding school originally and then maybe aged up to a university to make the main relationship like less, still unethical, but like less illegal is kind of the feeling of it. It feels like it was originally set in a boarding school because the way that people are acting is not like people in their kind of 18 to early 20s age range. And yeah, everyone's acting very young. The rules don't really make sense. The classes don't make sense. The idea that you could take this transcript elsewhere if nobody knows this place exists doesn't make any sense. Also, there's this thing where we find out about Vad's dissertation. It keeps being alternately referred to as thesis and dissertation, and he's a doctorate student. And I'm increasingly thinking this is intended to be set in like America. And if he's doing a dissertation, if he's a doctoral student, he's doing his dissertation. He gives his description of his dissertation that it is, I'm gonna have to pull up the actual description because it was weird. It's very vague. He says that his dissertation is on the correlation and influence of music on literature through the ages, which if you actually presented that to a dissertation committee, it's like, here's what I want to work on, you would be laughed out of the room. Like, that is so broad and vague, and it doesn't mean anything. You would be like, just completely laughed out of the room. That isn't a dissertation topic. You spend the rest of your life writing that, because you can't study like all of the music ever in every time period and all the literature in every time period and, you know, in every culture. Like, you can't do that. It's not physically possible. That's why people specialize in particular eras and types of literature. So that kind of drove me nuts. There's also the word lust gets used about 50 million times. Constantly we're told that Corvina is feeling lust. This is the first time she ever felt lust for a human man and not a fictional character. Corvina was experiencing lust. This is what lust is. And we just get told lust, lust, lust over and over again, which is weird. Also, she has a voice in her head who she is named Mo. Editing Hope, remember to insert picture of Mo here for reference. There's a murder lake near the campus. And, oh, the last points. One, very bad wording in a few points. There's a point where she is standing outside the room while he is playing the piano, and he realizes she's there. He doesn't know who she is, and he of course gets very angry because he seems to be somebody who kind of flies off the handle quite easily, and he yells at her to go away. That's fine. She's startled when she realizes that he knows she's there, and she's described as like, you know, kind of having a moment of like hiding, and like she's got her candle because for some reason she has the vibe of like coming out of the 19th century because she grew up with her mother, the town witch. She's like with her little candle going up the staircase in her like Victorian nightgown, her long black hair. But she's described as having fisted her gown, and that gets used twice in the same page. I know what it's supposed to be describing, but no. That's not how you describe that. That's not... I started crying so hard I was wheezing. I mean, not crying. I was laughing so hard I was crying and wheezing. And now I can't words anymore because I've experienced too many of them. And then the very last point I have, just to recap it all up and to give you the vibe that I'm getting off of these characters, which is bad, is that Vad is reminding me a lot of the Emperor from Baldur's Gate 3. If you know, you know. He has Mind Flayer vibes, and I'm not enjoying it. I think he's super creepy and unethical at best, and possibly a serial killer at worst. So yeah, I'm not enjoying the big manly man and his creepy vibes. Welcome back to Anti-Vad Hours. This man is rancid, and I've got to talk fast because I need to go get some food before I go to work. But I'm not quite halfway yet. I'm getting very close. I'm on page 157, and Vlad is terrifying. He is not a love interest. He is terrifying. Like, if a man acted like this towards you in real life, you'd be like going to your school's like Title IX office to be like, hey, I'm being sexually harassed. You'd be asking for a restraining order against him because he's creepy as hell. So what's happened since you've seen? So we get this story. We have one important plot bit. We get a story that there was these group of students several years ago who, and I say several, I mean like 100 years ago, who were kidnapping and murdering local people from the village, and then another group of students went into the forest and killed that first group of students, and they're referred to as the Slayers, and that's clearly an error in that point because it goes unremarked when we first get the story, and later somebody else says something about the Slayers to Corvina, and she's like, what's that? And then it's clearly like we're supposed to learn about that later. So that was clearly an editing problem, that wasn't caught and removed because it's clearly not supposed to happen there. But we get this directly after she goes to class, gets kind of distracted in class. Vad calls her out. Another kid kind of heckles her, and he shows a strong dislike of other boys noticing her. Like this other kid who is in her friend group like heckles her and is like, come sit with me, Purple, I'll keep you interested in class. And Vad immediately is like clenching his jaw and telling this kid that his behavior is bullshit. And like, it's weird that he's so upset about it. And then I think the worst bit is that up until this point, he's been stalking her. So outside of class, everywhere she goes, she feels him watching her. And this is after they've had one interaction in a forest where he threatened her and said that he was dangerous. And now he's stalking her. And then at the end of this class, when she's been kind of distracted, he calls her to the front and he's like, you know, stay after for a minute, let me talk to you. And so she goes up to the front and he doesn't say anything. He just stares at her. And then he tells her that that's not how you look at your teacher. And she says, well, that's not how you address your student, because he keeps calling her little crow. And he says that she's looking at him as if she's inviting him to play. And she says, that's how you look at me too. She gets distracted again because she's like hallucinating or something. She's seeing something out of the corner of her eyes and she's not sure if she's hallucinating or if there's like a ghost or what's happening. So she gets distracted. He tries to get her attention again and he grabs her face and turns her head and is like, what are you looking at? And she tells him, I don't know, because she doesn't know. And then he says, you might be a luring siren, but I'm no ordinary sailor. I'm a mad pirate, and I'm trying to resist your call. If I land on your shores, I will plunder and take away everything worth having. Which is an objectively creepy thing to say. He says that. Also, his class is absolute bullshit. It seems to be like an entire, like, 3 semesters worth of content, and everything he says is super vague. Like, motifs that emerged during the Middle Ages. Like, which motifs? What part of the Middle Ages? What variety of literature? Like, everything he says is just so bullshit in class. But then he goes and says something super creepy like that to her, and then he walks away telling her to stay away from him because he needs to resist her. So he's framing it as her fault that he's having these feelings. Also, she's taking 7 classes for some reason. This is so obviously supposed to be a boarding school that's just been aged up because nothing that happens here, like the students aren't allowed to leave. She's taking 7 classes for some reason. They all talk like they're in high school. The rules are very strange. Like, there's nothing about this that is a university. It's a boarding school that's just been aged up a little bit. So also we get reiterations every time he's on screen of how big he is, that he's just so big and tall, and she's so petite and adorable and feminine. It's very gross. It's weird gender stuff all over the place because all of the men are like big and all of the women are small and feminine. It's just very strange. And then plot-wise, does anything else happen? Oh, also, somehow it's now autumn, even though class was supposed to start on January 5th. I don't know how that's happening. She's only been there a few weeks, so I don't know. It's somehow autumn now. It's like moving into the fall. And then she also keeps going on about how she's so much older than all of her friends, but her friends are like seniors and a handful of first years like her. So they're all like 18 or 19 or up to like 21, and she's about to turn 22. So I don't know what that's all about. It's very weird understanding of age. Let's see. My one thing I do like, Corvina has a bunch of rituals that she does that are kind of generally associated with like kind of Wiccan beliefs, and she does them not so much as like religious practice but as a sort of like grounding ritual for herself, and I do like that detail. It's the only personality that she has. She's terrible at comebacks. Somebody says, apparently, she's been in the forest like twice, right? She finds some like graveyard thing. She comes out of the forest for the 2nd time, and then somehow there's already rumors circulating that she's like doing witchcraft and giving blowjobs in the forest, which is such a weird rumor. It's so very high school. But the girl that tells her that is the like bully kid, but is clearly like not actually a bully. And Corvina makes some remark like, I didn't know you went in for stereotypes. If we paid attention to them about you, you'd just be some dumb blonde bimbo, which I don't take seriously anybody who uses the word bimbo unironically. Mention about the Slayer. Anything else super interesting? Oh, she goes to the library to turn in a book. while she's there, she gets scared because she pulls out a book off the shelf and there's a guy behind the shelf and he's like, "They're here, the Slayers," and he like runs off. But she screams, and then of course, screaming in a library, somebody comes to figure out what's going on, and it's bad because of course it is. She is kneeling down to like get the book. He helps her up, and then he pins her against a shelf and hides her from view and gets right in her face. And he's like, "We can't be doing this, we shouldn't be doing this." And then he tells her, "Stop me." Which of course she doesn't, because she thinks this is hot and an attractive way to behave. And she's like, "Oh, he's so protective, he's shielding me from view." No, he's cornering you in a library. She asked him about the girl that previously died. He says that he was with that girl one time before he knew she was a student, and so we don't really know it's the truth. Corvina's assuming now that Alyssa was lying to Jade at some point. It's very weird that that's the assumption that she jumps to. But he corners her in a library where no one can see her. And they have a very brief sexual encounter that's very weird. And then he keeps being like, "We can't do this again. We have to stop. I can't be doing this." But he never actually like makes any real effort to stop. There's so many euphemisms that are all bad. I'm not gonna say them because I'm gonna start giggling and that's gonna be a problem. The one good thing also from a later section, she has like another class, it's all fine. We have Troy and the boys, which is a great phrase. Also, Troy turns out to be the post urchin, the boy who takes the letters to town, which is mentioned in like the first chapter, which is very silly. So Troy is the mail boy. He's taken all the letters to town. It's very good. They go into the forest, they see a spooky shack. And they're like, "Oh no, we gotta get out of here." And Jax is helping Corvina kind of navigate, and he's holding her hand, and Bad sees that. And then she, in the middle of the night, decides that she's gonna go to, she has a nightmare with a terrible use of tarot that like 3 cards fall out in her nightmare while she's like being drowned in the lake. And it's like the devil, the lovers, and the tower, which is clearly intended to just actually be like her and Vad in a tower. It's a terrible use of tarot as symbolism. But she has this nightmare. She takes her tarot cards out into the forest to kind of like walk it off. She goes to this little graveyard, but of course he's in the graveyard because there's a piano there, and he's repairing a piano in the outdoors, which is absolutely not going to work. And this is the first time he acts like even vaguely human. They have like a little conversation about his interest in the piano, her interest in tarot, and then he kind of is like, "Oh, well, that's kind of cool." And then he gets right up in her face. All of a sudden he gets up, he strides over to her, gets right in her face again, and is like, "We can't do this, we have to stop, I have to resist you." And then she kisses him, and they like make out in a graveyard, and then he looks sad about it. And she's like, "Oh, woe is me, my first kiss is with a man who now regrets that he's done it." And also, it's during that scene, no, it's later. Maybe it is that. There's a scene where he says something about like, she says, "This is lust," and he says, "No, I've experienced lust, and this is something worse. This is some barbaric need to possess, to eliminate, to own. This is madness." He keeps saying things that I think were written to sound cool and sexy, but they just sound like really creepy. Also during that scene, right before he gets right in her face, he's questioning her about Jax because he saw her holding Jax's hand, and he's like, "Do you think Jax is handsome? Is he prettier than me?" And it's so creepy. And he doesn't actually start acting like a human until 100 pages in. And then she goes to town to mail a letter because she mails a letter to her mother every year at her birthday, at like Corvina's birthday, not her mother's birthday. And she really needs to post this letter, but they've already taken the mail for the week, and so they desperately needs to get to town. And he's like, "Oh, well, I'm going to run an errand, I'll take you too." And so she's like, "Okay, thank God, like I could go post this letter." And they like drive to town and have a really normal conversation. He kind of asks about her background, who she's sending her letter to, like completely normal little conversation. They drive to town, it's all good, it's chill. He drops her off, he's like, "Okay, I'll see you in an hour, I gotta go run my errands." And she goes in, talks to the lady at the post office, finds out more about the Slayers, who we find out that the woman at the post office, her aunt, was one of the Slayers' victims. I gotta stop talking, my battery is flashing at me. All of that happens, they drive back, then they have sex in his car because there's a big storm. And he is disgustingly aggressive, even though he knows that this is her first time. And he's just like, "You picked the wrong person for your first time, but it's too late now." And it sounds so painful through the whole thing. Everybody's gonna know that something is up when she returns to campus and she's like limping and wincing when she has to sit down. That's as far as I've gotten. There has been no more plot, and anti-Vad is my official stance. I really don't like him. He's super creepy, and if he was a real human man, you'd be asking for a restraining order. I haven't read anymore. I just wanted to show you my cat. He loves shoulder time. Also, he's using me as a ladder to get onto my desk. I know what you're doing. I know what you're up to. Yep, there he goes. I managed to read like another 100 pages of Gothikana, so I thought I'd check in again. Although, hilariously, key light? My light just went out? Oh, I hit the button on accident, hang on. Back to my thought. Hilariously, very little has happened in 100 pages. So I think the last time I checked in, basically what had happened was that Corvina had had sex with Vad in his car, and then that should have been the last thing I mentioned. My battery's flashing, hang on. Okay, hopefully that's the last of the chaos. Got a fresh battery in, and I'll need to charge the other one when I get home from work. But anyway, back to this. At the point that I started reading again, Vad's been ignoring Corvina for like 2 weeks. Like, they've had sex in his car, and now he's just like, she doesn't exist. He's pretty much not talking to her at all. He's not stalking her anymore. And she's kind of like devastated. She thinks that like he's satisfied now and his interest has moved on, but she's like become attached to him. But what actually happens is that, first of all, we get a brief like Vad interlude where he's all angry about this like Mo situation in his head. Basically, while they're having sex, she hears Mo's voice in her head and she says Mo, and then he's like, who the fuck is Mo? So then we get a whole thing of him being like angry about the whole Mo situation. But then he's ignoring her for a couple of weeks, and throughout this time her friend Jax clearly has a bit of a crush on her, and he's spending a lot of time with her. He's, you know, going out of his way to be around her, make sure she gets a chance to sit next to him, like, but he's a really nice guy. So like Jax is actually very kind to Corvina, and it's just kind of like funny and jokey, and he really respects her space and everything. And Vad doesn't like that. So she goes in the library to return a book, and he like grabs her and pulls her into the stacks. And it starts kissing her without her consent, and then is like demanding to know she slept with Jax. And then he also asks about Mo, and she doesn't respond on either of those accounts. She like pushes him away and leaves. And she's like very angry at him. She's validly angry at him, and is like, you've been ignoring me for weeks, and now you just demand to know about my personal life as if you have a right to know about it. And I think she has a valid point there, but she doesn't stay mad at him that long. So that happens. And then the next, I think it's like the next day or a couple of days later, she's headed to class. And the timeline is all kinds of wild, because we find out as they're headed to class that the vault is being reopened. It's a room where the Slayers were apparently doing their dark magics before they were kind of initially caught and started doing their like orgies and sacrifices in the woods. So the Slayers' vault was shut up and locked up and not spoken about again until now, when Vad has like convinced the board that they should reopen it because it would like be a cool rec room or something. And the kids think it's weird because it's like a few weeks away from the Black Ball. This doesn't make any sense because 2 weeks ago it was just beginning to be winter when she was going to town with Vad to mail her letter, and now somehow we're just a few weeks away from the June 5th Black Ball. So I don't know how that's working. The timeline is so inconsistent. I have no idea what time of year it's supposed to be at all. But that happens, and then Troy realizes that she's interested in Mr. Deverell, and he actually gives her a good warning, and he's like, listen, I don't have a problem with him, and your business is your business. However, he gives me the vibe that if I was alone with him, I'd probably die. That is not a man I'd want to be alone with in a dark night. Just be careful, okay? Like, it's your business, but like, be careful. I care about you. And so Troy's like real sweet to her, and he's great. He's a good friend. And then later that day, she's in her psychology class, and she starts hearing voices that are not the usual voices. She's seeing shadows, and she starts muttering back to them. So she thinks now her schizophrenia is progressing. We do actually get a confirmation that it is schizophrenia that her mother was experiencing, and that Corvina is not afraid that she is developing. But she starts muttering to the voices. The teacher kind of asks her about it, and she says, oh, I'm not feeling well, and like bolts. But she starts going, I have to get to the tower, I have to get to the tower, because she just has this like sense that something is going wrong. And this is my issue with this, is that Corvina doesn't investigate. She just like magically knows that something is going on and just goes to wherever the thing is happening. So she follows these shadows and is like bolting downstairs and slams into Vad. It says she hit a hard wall but also nearly fell down the stairs, and I'm like, I think the wall must be Vad because it starts swearing. But he grabs her and is like, hey, what's going on? And he realizes she's seeing something that he can't see, and he starts asking her about it. and she's like, please, I just need to get to the tower. He finally lets her go. She goes to the tower, and Troy is now standing on top of the tower, about to jump off of it. There's a lot of suicide in this book. Side note, there, like, so many characters commit suicide in this book, mostly in the past, but there are some, like Troy, like, on page. So just be aware of that if you decide to pick this up for some reason after watching this video, but that happens a lot. But Troy is standing up on top of this tower about to jump, and Vad is like, oh shit, like, I better get up there and try to stop him, because he's the first teacher on the scene. And he grabs like 2 other students that are Troy's friends, and is like, come on, we gotta go. There's an alternate route to the roof, like, let's go see if we can save him. So they go running off to see if they can get up there, and then Troy is not responding to anybody. People are yelling, he's not saying anything, but Corvina yells up to him, and he does turn and look at her, and he smiles, and then he jumps off the roof. And so Troy is now dead, and it's very depressing for everybody there, especially because another girl had died like this previously. And right as he dies, she sees a shadow over his body, and then she hears his voice in her head saying, "Purple, tell my brother." And she's like, he has a brother? Like, since when? She finds out from her friends that Troy has an older brother who is on the International Investigation Squad, which is the silliest name for a thing ever, and also not a real thing, so I don't know what's up with that. So he has an older brother named Ajax who's on the squad, and he's gonna come and pick up Troy's body after all of this has happened. But the night after Troy dies, Vad corners Corvina, and he's like, hey, if I show you something, can it stay between us? And she's like, yeah, sure. And he takes her to a secondary location. You should never allow someone to take you to a secondary location. Street smarts. But she goes with him, and it turns out that he takes her to his bedroom in the faculty wing and corners her there and starts interrogating her about, like, how did she know to go to the tower if she didn't know Troy was about to jump? What was she seeing that he couldn't see? She starts having a panic attack. He finally kind of relents and is like, okay, I shouldn't ask you just then, it was too much. Gives her some water, and he's like, I'm gonna go work out, I'll be back later. She falls asleep, wakes up the next morning. He's just crawled in bed with her at some point, she doesn't know when, and she gets up and leaves and goes back to her room, talks to Jade briefly, who is devastated because Jade is dating Troy. And then she has like a spooky encounter in the bathroom where one of the mirrors breaks, and then it looks like she's like having a hallucination of herself in the mirror. And Roy, who is the bully kid, comes in, and Roy is not actually a bully. Roy is actually pretty chill, and checks in on her and like makes sure she's okay, and then gives her some information about like, oh, if you need to make a call because Corvina wants to call her doctor, you need to have either a faculty member or get the board to sign off on you using the emergency landline, which is very silly. This is definitely not actually a university. This is definitely more of a boarding school, and at that, like, they behave like these students are locked in. Like, they are not allowed to go anywhere. They're not allowed to contact the outside world. It's very creepy. So all of that happens, and then we've pretty much hit the end of the plot that happened in 100 pages. Oh, the one thing that does happen is that Ajax shows up. Corvina meets him, and she suggests that she thinks there's something kind of odd about the brother's death, and we learn from the school that they're basically not telling him that another girl died the same way his brothers did, under the same like kind of weird circumstances. And Ajax, being an investigator, wants to have all the information, so he arranges a time to meet with Corvina privately and get some more information from her because she was a friend of Troy's. And so they meet in the woods at night because he doesn't want the school to know, because that's not spooky at all. And is like, basically, like, can you tell me anything? And so they're talking, and she tells him everything she knows about Troy and that he seemed fine that morning. She had talked to him. There was no indication that he was about to jump. And then she doesn't tell him about the voice in her head, obviously, but she's like, yeah, I don't know, something about it's just weird to me. And Ajax is like, yeah, that's, you know, odd. But he says, but this castle does weird things to people. Like, I left as soon as I could, and I don't think anybody stays here unless they absolutely have to. And she remarks that she has a professor who's been here for a long time. And he's like, oh, who? And she's like, Vad Devereaux. And he turns around and he's like, the fucking bastard finally found you, which is a weird thing to say to somebody. And then starts telling her what he knows about Vad, that they had been in this orphanage together as children, and then Vad was adopted by his own grandfather, or somebody who claimed to be his grandfather, and left the orphanage, and Vad is believed to have possibly killed his grandfather, because the day that Vad turned 18, his grandfather fell down the stairs and died, and they weren't very steep stairs, and then Vad inherited everything, and this is how she finds out that Vad actually owns Varen Moor and all of the grounds, and he's actually a board member as well. And so she finds that out, and Vad shows up to be all hostile at Ajax. and Ajax and him have a bit of a dick measuring contest and kind of yell at each other. We find out that Vad is also possibly paying off the International Investigation Squad for reasons unknown, probably because he committed murder and he doesn't want to be, like, arrested for it. But that is revealed, and Corvina is, I think, understandably upset at this turn of events, right? And so she's like, who the fuck are you? Like, and he just says, I'm who I always have been to you. And she says, a stranger. And he gets very angry, and he's like, a stranger? And she gets this sense of, like, a dangerous aura from him, and starts thinking, if I run, he's going to chase me. And so she runs, and he chases her and slams her against a tree. And then they have very violent sex against this tree. She never gets a chance to verbally consent. We know because as readers we're in her head that she is, like, internally consenting to this. She's fine with it. But she never, like, verbally consents. He never asks for her consent. So the only reason that we know that is because of being in her head all the time. Outwardly, it very clearly looks like rape. So they have this very violent sex. The whole time he's like, you know, would a stranger know X, Y, and Z thing about you? No, I can't possibly be a stranger. And it's like, that's not how this works, Vad. But afterwards, he's immediately weirdly gentle with her again. And he's like, listen, if you meet me after class tomorrow, I'll answer all your questions and, like, give you my tragic backstory or whatever. And then he sends her off to go back to the campus before she's missed. I'm like, I don't know where Ajax disappeared to that he didn't see or hear any of this, but he's off somewhere. And yeah, now Corvina is, like, officially in a relationship with him. Oh, and there was an intervening bit I think I forgot to mention where she meets him in the vault that's been reopened, and they're the only people in there because people are kind of weirded out by it. And it's where he's now keeping his piano that he had in the attic at the beginning of the book. And they're having a conversation, and he insists on going down on her while asking her about her traumas. Because he's like, oh, well, it'll keep you from panicking like you did the last time I asked. So they have a whole conversation about her schizophrenia, or possible schizophrenia, while that's happening. And it's very weird and very uncomfortable. And it concludes with him just deciding that they're in a relationship now. That, like, well, we're gonna do this because I want to, and I'm tired of trying to not do this, so, like, we're just gonna make it work. So much of this is just Vad deciding things for Corvina, and I think I would buy some of the things that he says that are supposed to be all cool and sexy better if he had treated her like a person from the start rather than just constantly being possessive and creepy about everything. He's, on, like, a couple occasions, he's been kind to her and, like, treated her like a human being, but for the most part he just acts like she's his property, and it's very disgusting and very creepy. About the only line that I think I like is he remarks that he's the devil she knows, not the devil she doesn't, which he then goes on to say is that he's not the one behind all the creepy stuff happening at the school, but he is trying to figure out what's happening, why that's all happening. Like, he's trying to solve the mystery, which is why he's kind of remained at Varenmore for all of this time, because otherwise he would have just left and not been involved with everything. So, like, probably the only reason I even like that line is it's very reminiscent. If you've played Baldur's Gate 3, there's a character, Raphael, who says something about, like, what's better than a devil you don't know, a devil you do. Like, Raphael is great as a villain, so, like, I like that line from him, which is probably the only reason I even like this line here. But I think that Vad is just super creepy and terrible, and I feel like Corvina is just ending up in an abusive relationship, but she doesn't know any better that that is abusive, and she's being taken advantage of by a man who has a lot of authority over her, because now we know not only is he a teacher, he's also a board member, and he owns the castle. So power imbalance is power imbalancing. But that's pretty much all that's happened. Like, I read 100 pages, and the only plot events were Troy dying and then his brother showing up to be like, ah, Vad owns the castle. That's it. And I'm impressed by the lack of plot that this book has, especially for something that has been, like, shelved as a mystery and sold as, like, a gothic dark academia mystery thriller kind of a thing. It's very much just a really bad romance. So yeah, impressively little plot, and I've got about 150 pages left, so I'm hopeful I can finish that in the next couple of days. We are finally closing in on the end of Gothikana. I've got about 100 pages left, a little less than that, and I was debating about whether or not to check in today or like check in before I finished it, but there's something that happens here that I want to talk about that I wanted to talk about before my rage kind of cooled on it, right? So before I get to that, what I want to do real quick is give you the plot summary of the actual like plot events that have happened so far since the last time I checked in. I believe the last time I checked in was right after we find out that Vad is the owner of Varenmore, and he has aggressive sex with Corvina in the forest, and like that's kind of it. Well, in the wake of that, he tells her, come to, you know, stay after class tomorrow, come talk to me after class tomorrow, and I will tell you my backstory, and I'll answer all of your questions. So she goes to him after class, and I was like, okay, getting my answers now. We get his tragic backstory. It's not that tragic. His grandfather was a serial killer, is what we find out, is that his grandfather is the leader of the Slayers we've been hearing about all book, and he led them in killing 15 of the local villagers, but then when the rest of the students turned on the Slayers, he also led those other students to them, and it was involved in killing the other Slayers. And so the grandfather did all of this, and then many years later, he's an old man, he doesn't have an heir, and he finds out from his son that his son had a son who he like abandoned at an orphanage, and so the grandfather eventually finds Vad and like adopts him back, and you know, basically wants an heir, so he readopts Vad, and Vad becomes the heir to Varenmore. But he tells Vad the story of his involvement with the Slayers on Vad's 18th birthday. And so that's also the day the grandfather has died, which we know from Ajax, and Vad clarifies that he can't tell Corvina exactly what happened, but she should know that he has no regrets. So very obviously he did kill the grandfather, but he did it because he found out the grandfather was a serial killer. And he also really wanted to have Varenmore because he'd heard all of these stories kind of from the time he was adopted up until he turned 18. And he really wanted to like have something of his own for the first time because like for so many years he'd been at this orphanage and had not had anything. And so his entire backstory is just being entitled, and also he is the grandson of a serial killer and he's salty about it, I guess. So that's the entirety of his backstory. And then their relationship progresses some, and we'll come back to that. But then Corvina has a nightmare, and she goes, oh my god, the bodies are in the lake, because we find out from Vad that in the wake of the original deaths, nobody bothered to drag the lake. Not then, not any time in the like 100 years that have passed since then has anybody dragged the lake. So he finally calls some people in, based on Corvina having a dream and going, oh my god, the bodies are in the lake. He calls some people in, including Ajax, and they bring a team of divers, they drag the lake, they find 14 of the 15 people who died, and it's like this big breakthrough. He's very relieved that they finally found the bodies, and I'm just like, why didn't it occur to Vad at any point to drag the lake, that there might have been bodies in the lake? Because the whole thing with the disappearances is that the bodies were never found, and there's a lake like right next to campus. So I would think that like in an investigation, if there was a lake, that would be one of your earliest things you would do. And also he claims that he's here trying to hunt down the evil haunting the school, but he doesn't seem to be doing any investigating at all, and he just kind of like finds out about the stuff in the lake because Corvina magically knows about it somehow. This is my other issue with this mystery, is that there is no mystery. There's no investigation at all. It's just Corvina like kind of magically finding things out and then like relating that information to Vad and then getting some sort of like proof. So also Vad suspects that at least Troy's death may be in some way related to Corvina, or maybe is like directed at him, because he finds a note after going to try and save Troy that just says dance macabre, and he thinks that it's a very directed, pointed note because the day that Troy died was the day that they were supposed to be turning in their stories based on the concept of the dance macabre. So that's it. That's his evidence right there. That's the extent of the investigation that has actually happened. So they found all these bodies, and then kind of near the end of the section I read, Corvina starts hearing that one voice that she originally heard again, and the voice tells her, I need you to find me, you didn't find me, you're next. And so now we know that there's like one body that wasn't found. There were 14 bodies found, but 15 people died, and there's still a girl who her body must still be missing, and Corvina is next, whatever that means in the context of this book. And we're kind of now waiting for it to be the Black Ball, which is this big event that happens every 5 years, and somebody disappears during it every 5 years. And so they're kind of waiting to see if somebody's going to disappear again. I presume Corvina is going to disappear. That's my guess for that. But that's all of the plot that has happened, was that Corvina magically knows there's bodies in the lake, they drag the lake and find the bodies, and now we know that there's still a body missing. That's the entirety of the plot that actually happens during this section. Most of it is Vad and Corvina having a lot of sex, like just constantly, like 3 times a day. I don't know when they're finding the time for all of that. But the bit in here, the thing that I wanted to come back to and talk about, because I'm really pissed off about it, is it has to do with some of the like romance elements that this book is using. And I think my problem here is that this is just a thinly veiled stalker romance, and it's not saying that it's that, but it is framing everything he does as romantic, and like he's supporting her, he's like helping her. And no, that's not what he's doing. He's been stalking her. He doesn't support her. He doesn't allow her privacy. He never allows her to decide when she's ready to tell him something. Every dream she has, everything she experiences, everything she sees, he demands and he demands and he demands that she tell her story to him every single time. She tells him every detail all of the time. But he doesn't freely give information back to her. It takes him a very long time to tell her anything, and she has to push and push and push to get even a sliver of information about him. So it's just like really frustrating to read that. He's awful. He's very controlling. But I want to say, I think dark romance is maybe just not for me, and I think that this is what this is truly is as a genre. That was a very terrible sentence. I apologize. But like, it's shelved as mystery at my library, and most of the marketing I've seen has talked about it as like a kind of dark academia gothic mystery with a romance. No, it's just dark romance. And on top of that, like, I get dark romance is a thing. It's a genre on its own. And it's probably not for me. I don't think I'm a dark romance girly. However, I think this is also just a particularly egregious book, and it's very poorly written. It's structurally bad. It is at a copywriting and line level bad. There's lots of like weird word choices, like foundation instead of founding, got instead of gotten. Just like lots of little things that tell me that this book wasn't edited in the slightest. The timeline is all over the place. At one point it's supposed to be January, but somehow it's autumn, and then 2 weeks after the beginning of winter it's somehow only a month away from an event that's supposed to be happening in June. So like, the timeline is all over the place. Vad can't decide if he's working on a thesis or a dissertation. That matters. They're different things. The courses she's taking aren't courses you would be taking at a university, and not in the structure that she's taking them in. She's taking 7 classes. I don't know why. And yeah, it's very, very poorly written, and it has clearly not been edited at all. Like, Tor picked this up and they just printed it. They didn't edit it at all. So I'm finding that really frustrating. But that's why I think it is important to talk about the things that are here, because it's so poorly written, and I don't think that this is indicative of what dark romance as a whole is like. Because I suspect there are some very well-written dark romances. This is not one of them. And it never at any point acknowledges the horrifying things that Vad is doing. So to finally come around to the thing that I'm really pissed off about that we need to talk about, is that we find out that Vad, I don't know how he got access to any of this either, but he used his place on the board to get information from the boys' home that he used to live in, because he wanted to find out what had happened to his best friend there. He had a friend who apparently died in the fire that burned down this boys' home. And he's really sad about that, actually, and he wants to find out kind of what happened. So he's like digging through the files, except the boys' home he was at was the Morning Star Institute for Lost Boys. And now there is a Morning Star Institute that is a psychiatric institute. So when the place burned down, it was rebuilt and reopened as a psychiatric institute. And it happens to be the same one that Corvina went to, that her mother is currently living in, and the one that Corvina went to for her own testing for schizophrenia. And we find out that while he was somehow digging through their records, I don't know how he got access. He says as a member of the board, but I don't think that's just a misunderstanding of how like university boards work and their actual like sphere of influence. But as a member of the board, he got access there and was looking to find out what happened to his friend Fury. And he sees a picture of Corvina's mother. And he sees purple eyes, and he remembers what Zelda told him. So he goes to the psychiatric institute, and he visits Corvina's mother. Unbeknownst to Corvina. She's never heard of him before coming to this school. He visits her mother. Her mother seems to be under the impression that Vad is Corvina's boyfriend at the time, and is asking him to like look after her and take care of her. And he has a conversation with her just to see what comes out of it because of this prophecy from Zelda. And then as he's leaving, he walks out and he sees Corvina sitting in the waiting room, waiting to see Dr. Detta. And I have to assume he's been stalking her for 3 years, because that was 3 years ago. when she was, I think she would have been about 18 or 19. So 3 years ago, he saw her in a waiting room. And now, 3 years later, he used his position as a member of the board to have her admitted to the school without ever having applied. So he went and he found a vulnerable young woman, and he had her brought to him at his spooky murder castle. And that's really extremely fucked up. Just that he, one, had access to her medical records, two, that he's been stalking her for all of this time, three, he also says that he only had her brought there to assuage his curiosity, that it wasn't that he knew he was going to fall in love with her or anything, he just wanted her to be there so that he could be, like, curious about her. But he's immediately so weird about it at the beginning. It's horrifying that he got her medical records and he's been stalking her for all of this time, unbeknownst to her, and she takes that as romantic. That he has always known about her possible schizophrenia and he accepted her anyway. That he has been looking out for her from day one. I'm having a terrible time with words at the moment. He's been looking out for her because he, like, had her brought to this spooky castle in the mountains where she might be kidnapped and murdered. Like, that just enrages me so much, the way that that is framed as, like, a positive thing that Corvina should want. And it's so disgusting. It's just horrible behavior. That should have her, like, running for the hills. As my friend said, he's described as being big a lot, so she's like, you might think he's a big, large man, but he's really just hundreds of red flags in a trench coat, and that's really the vibe for Vad. He is horrible. And I just needed to talk about that particular section before we move on, because that made me so angry reading about how he'd stalked her, and now this vulnerable young woman who has no other, like, frame or context to understand who the action's in besides, like, romances with aggressive, possessive protagonists. She's completely under his control. And she, like, even at various points acknowledges that he's big and he's scary and he could kill her. And then she just keeps trusting him anyway, even though everything he has done suggests that he is not to be trusted. And it just, I hate him so much. I hate him immensely. And I think that, like, there probably are well-written dark romances, but this is not one of them. And I think this is particularly egregious. That this book is just continuously framing really, really abusive and dangerous behavior as romantic and desirable, and it's not questioning that. It'll kind of go, oh, but he's big and scary, maybe he could kill her. Is he to be trusted? And she invariably decides that yes, he can be trusted, because he knows about her schizophrenia and hasn't, like, run away from her yet. And I find that reprehensible. So that's pretty much all I've read. I have about 100 pages left. I think Corvina's gonna get kidnapped, and probably Vad's gonna have to save her or something. Did I have anything else interesting in my notes? I do have Beast Vad written, which is in her dream. There's, like, a beast version of him, which is kind of terrifying. There's also, like, random little details. I'm like, why are we trying to make me like him now? Because there's, like, a random detail that she's been avoiding the forest so that she doesn't run into him in the forest for, like, several weeks now, and so she hasn't been able to feed the crows that she had been feeding. And we find out that he has been actually feeding them when he goes to fix the piano that's out in the graveyard. He's been taking snacks to the crows. Like, that's actually an adorable little detail. Why are we trying to make me like him now when he's done all of these other horrible things? Also, the piano is a murder piano. The Slayers like to have music with their murder, and now he's trying to fix up the murder piano. I don't know why. Anything else? There's a bit where she gets to do some tarot readings for people, and that bit's really cute until Vad shows up to ruin it, but it's like she finally gets to do something that she really loves and realizes that she's, like, capable of being loved and accepted for who she is without Vad, although then she attributes it to her newfound confidence because she knows that Vad cares about her or whatever. It's very silly. But, like, up until we get to that point, it's just a very cute scene of her, like, doing tarot readings. It's a terrible use of tarot. It's like, that's not how that works at all. But, like, the fact that she's got this little crowd around her and she's, like, just doing this and, like, happily doing tarot readings for people is very adorable. And I'm like, you know, I like that until Vad ruins it. That's okay. Thesis and dissertation, I think I already mentioned, keeps getting alternated and it's terrible. Also, I've just written, they drag the like and find bodies, shocked Pikachu face. That's pretty much the extent of my notes. There really wasn't much that happened, and I'm just, like, in shock of how bad this book is. This is one of the worst books I've ever read, and I see what people meant now when they said that it was terrible. I did it. I finished Gothikana, and the good news is that the last 100 pages had the most plot and least sex in them, so I'm like, you know what? I'm happy about that. Mostly because the sex scenes were just really poorly written, so I was getting kind of tired of reading so many of them. But there's still not a lot of plot, so like bear with me. There's really not much that happens. At the very last 100 pages, we're kind of leading up to the Black Ball. Vad buys Corvina a dress and like has it sent to her, and then the night of the event comes, and this is the night that like every 5 years somebody disappears, on the night of the Black Ball. And she goes to the ball, big masquerade, briefly turns into an orgy because of course it does, and he and Corvina end up leaving, and they just go off and hang out elsewhere. They go out into the ruins for a little bit. He gives her like a promise ring, and then they just kind of hang out in the vault under the castle for a while. And then there's a big commotion and people start screaming, and so they go running upstairs and they're like, what's going on? And a bunch of people are like, oh my god, like Corvina's here, we found her. We thought that she and Jade were both missing, but we find out that Jade is missing, and so is Roy, the kind of bully character who's somewhat befriended Corvina. And so Roy and Jade are both missing, and the students are told to go back to their dorms unless they would like to join the search parties. Kaylin, who is the administration lady, is like organizing search parties, and Corvina goes running up to her room to get dressed to be in a search party because she's obviously wearing a dress, and she sees smoke from the woods, and so she comes running back down and tells them like, hey, there's smoke in the woods over by these ruins that are out there. Vad knows where it is, so he takes off running towards it to check there. Corvina follows him, and then Ajax follows Corvina, and they get out there, and the piano that he'd been working on is like on fire. They decide to split up, always a terrible idea, to do some searching, see if they can find either of the missing girls, and they do find Roy. Vad goes off to check the tunnels because he's the only one who has like the tunnels like memorized. He has a map of them. And Ajax runs off to check the weird creepy shack where they found a body. I think I forgot to mention that. They find a body that's like charred and burnt, and then that just kind of gets brushed aside, like that's just a thing that they find. And it's like spooky and creepy, but like that's it. So there's a body in the weird creepy shack that they saw earlier. Ajax goes to check that, and Corvina finds Roy floating in the lake, and she jumps in to save her and starts like screaming for Ajax and Vad. Ajax is close enough that he hears her, he comes, helps, rescues Roy, resuscitates her, and then he and Corvina go back to the castle with Roy. Vad is just missing for a couple of hours, but Roy finally comes to. She's okay, she doesn't remember getting to the lake, and Ajax is standing talking to Corvina, and he gets a call, and the call tells him that they've identified the body that was found at the shack, and it's Jade. So there is actually a fake Jade. The girl who is Corvina's roommate has been a fake all along, which I thought that she was really suspicious at the beginning. The way she was behaving was odd, so I'm not entirely surprised that that was the route that this went, but fake Jade is now still missing. Ajax walks off to go see if he can find Vad and tell him what they found out, and Corvina is promptly blunt force traumatized, and she wakes up on the tower roof. We find out she's been drugged, and fake Jade starts monologuing. And fake Jade killed Alyssa, killed Troy, and basically is just killing anybody who sleeps with Vad or gets in her way or starts to like be suspicious of her. So she's just killing all of these people, and her whole point is that she wants Vad, because it turns out that she is also distantly related to him. She is also a Deverell. Technically, she's also an heir of the mountain. His grandfather's girlfriend, who was the witch who was like kind of inside of the Slayers, survived the night that all the Slayers died. She escaped. She was pregnant at the time, gave birth to her daughter. And then we find out about some very rapey things in Jade's backstory, because the grandmother knew of a drug that the Slayers had used to control their victims that came from a specific tree on the campus. This is not how trees or drugs work, but it has like multiple compounds in it, and they would like powder the leaves from this tree, and they called it devil's breath because you could control anybody who had like inhaled it. And so Jade tells her that Jade exists, fake Jade. We never actually get a name for her, so I'm just gonna keep calling her fake Jade. But fake Jade exists because her mother was interested in a man in town and used devil's breath on him, and then got pregnant by him and gave birth to Jade. And so, fake Jade, I should say. So that's super creepy and disturbing, and Jade is very excited about her, like, background. She's like, yeah, this is wonderful, like, we're powerful, we're scary, and she kind of delights in killing, and so she has, like, a very similar, like, my grandparent was a serial killer, except for her, it's framed as being like this upsetting thing, specifically because she is like happy about it, whereas Vad is implied to have killed his grandfather upon finding out that he was a serial killer, and that it was like he's horrified by that and is like ashamed of his family legacy. So like there's that branching thing. But my other problem is that because her motive is that she wants Vad, and she's violent towards anybody who expresses interest in him beyond her, she's just Vad, but a woman, and also slightly more murdery. And it makes me really uncomfortable that it's basically like that behavior is framed as romantic for Vad, that he's being super protective and possessive of Corvina, but when Jade does it, she's a villain. And she's also a murderer. So, like, she's still a murderer. Like, let's not forget that that's also part of it. Vad hasn't been, like, murdering people that Corvina interacts with. But it's just, it makes it really gross that they have basically the same personality. And for her, for the woman of the two of them, it's somehow, like, negative, where it's romantic for Vad. So that really upset me. But that happens. She is about to make Corvina jump off the roof when Vad gets to the roof. And he like tricks her into thinking that he's like happy about this, that like he's like, oh, did you do this for us? And then he grabs her and is like, how do you like fix the effects of the drug? And Jade is like, oh, you don't, she'll be your plaything, you do whatever you want with her, I'll watch. And he says, watch from hell, and throws her off the roof. And yeah, that's pretty much that. And he grabs Corvina, who is now hearing a whole bunch of voices screaming at her in her head, telling her to jump off the roof. And he pulls her back, and then she, I guess, dies or passes out of ghost social pressure, imaginary social pressure. Yeah, so she goes unconscious, and then the book shifts. She's now at the psychiatric institute, she having just been taken there. Ajax helped Vad get her there, and she's being kind of evaluated, and apparently saying, I'm going to marry her someday, is enough to account as like a family or trusted contact, family member or trusted contact, because then the doctor is just discussing her medical records with Vad, and is basically like mentally, or not mentally, but like based on her brain scans and like all the other stuff, she's physically healthy, she should be fine. However, we don't know how this is going to impact her, and it might trigger her psychosis. We don't know if she's going to have schizophrenia or not. Mo is like something that her brain came up with to cope with the kind of lack of parenting that she received as a child. And anyway, we're not like totally worried about her, but like if you notice anything weird start to happen in the next few years, bring her back as soon as that starts, because then we can like try to get her under treatment like as quickly as possible. So Vad is like grateful for that, and then it cuts away. We get an epilogue. We find out that Vad has left Varenmore. He still serves on the board, he still owns the place, but he doesn't teach there anymore, and he doesn't actually go to Varenmore at all. And he is teaching at like a local university to where they live. And Corvina has opened a small business. And oh, there's also a brief bit kind of in the middle of that. There's like 6 months later, she visits her mother for the first time, and her mother doesn't really seem to totally recognize what's going on, but she kind of does have something kind of filter through, because the mother has schizophrenia and also dementia now, and she manages to like recognize Corvina, and then she turns to Vad and says like boy something, like boy right or something. And he's like, yeah, I'm the one that visited you before. And she's like, boy, safe. And he's like, yes, I'm keeping her safe. And then she just says Raven a couple of times. So they had that kind of interlude. And then 5 years later is where we actually get the epilogue. 5 years later, they're living elsewhere. He's teaching at a local university. She's running a small business. And they're happy. They've got a dog. It's their anniversary. And he has decided to get his vasectomy reversed so that they can have children, because they've talked about it. And she has written a book called Gothikana, based on her experiences, published under the name C.V. Deverell, and it's a gothic romance set in a spooky school that's haunted, and there's like a mystery, so it's like a book within a book that is this book. Anyway, it's weird. So that happens, and then at the very end, they decide to go back to Varenmore to actually try and like solve the rest of its mysteries and like fix the place up and make it a safe place for people to be. Also, people have stopped going missing during the Black Ball, so that's a good thing. It's very annoying that a bunch of stuff just doesn't get answered. The kid in the library that she meets, we have no idea who he is. Jade did not put Roy in the lake. Actually, fake Jade liked Roy and is like, oh my god, is she okay? And when she finds out that Roy was in the lake. So we don't know how Roy got in the lake, but Roy doesn't remember being in the lake, so clearly she's been drugged at some point, or probably something has happened to her. So she doesn't remember being in the lake. And Jade is only responsible for the murders of Alyssa and Troy. So all of the other disappearances in the recent years, like what happened to Zoe, we never find out. It's just no answers provided. And then they get their little happily ever after. We also get a little bonus scene at the end that's Vad going into one of the tunnels, and he discovers some bones in this one particular tunnel that's been sealed since the Slayers were killed, because it was the like tunnel they were using to bring people onto the mountain. And he goes into it, and it's like really creepy and just kind of slightly supernatural feeling, and he finds a pile of bones, and he's like, that's not great. And then he's like, you know what, I'm getting a little creeped out. I'm gonna leave now, because clearly the girl that is missing is not here. So he decides to just book it back to the campus, and decides he's just gonna pretend that he never saw that. And I guess he just pretends he never saw that. So I don't know why that scene exists, other than to suggest that there's more going on the mountain and more secrets to be discovered. I hope this book never gets a sequel, because it was terrible, and I might feel obligated to read it since I've read this one. But that's basically it. So 2 murders are solved, the rest are stuff is happening on the mountain, who knows, and Vad is terrible for most of the book. Like, the epilogue would be really cute if he wasn't so awful for the rest of the book. He's just so possessive and gross, and he's definitely just like a stalker, and I don't buy their romance at all. It's so much about the sex for like the entire book. They have so little time that they spend like actually getting to know each other, or at least that we get to see, so the development just doesn't make any sense. So yeah, this is definitely one of the worst books I have ever read. You're welcome, because now you don't have to read it. Now you get to know. You don't have to read with your own eyes this book. I just want to say, like, in closing, I'm incredibly disappointed in Tor, because this book needed editing, and I think the kind of like lack of care that Bramble has put into this is really obvious from that lack of editing, from the like weird words, the lack of kind of developmental editing, that the timeline is all over the place. There's all kinds of like actual factual errors. And then the AI cover, like, so little care has been put into this. I don't know why Bramble picked this book up. I don't know why they apparently like received a PDF from the author and just sent it to the printer, because it needed so much work. And it's a book that I'm like, I don't hate anything about the premise. It's just, it's so poorly done that I think this is an embarrassing one for Bramble. So I hate to say that too, because Tor is one of my favorite publishers, and I was so excited when they announced the Bramble imprint, because I've been really enjoying like sci-fi and fantasy romance, reading some of the other ones that they had published, and it seems like they've just opened it specifically for this kind of like, this isn't even fantasy or sci-fi, it just has like, maybe it's ghosts, maybe, but they've been publishing this kind of like romantasy that I think kind of got categorized in like the Goodreads choice romantasy thing this year, this very like formulaic fantasy romance. And I don't understand why they've done that when they've been publishing other like really good fantasy and sci-fi romance under their other imprints. I don't understand, other than as a cash grab, why they've done that. And yeah, I'm massively disappointed in this, but I have finished it. I can say that I finished it now, and I can have an informed opinion. And hopefully you'll have enjoyed this video and enjoyed me ranting about it, maybe gotten something out of it. I don't know. Or maybe you didn't, and it was just funny. Fingers crossed somebody enjoys this video. But yeah, I've read it, and I hope that you have enjoyed it. And if you have, I hope you'll consider giving it a like, maybe even subscribing to see what comes next. I'm currently posting on Tuesdays and Saturdays, and I will go ahead and say that most videos are not like this. So no worries, I'm not going to be assaulting your ears with more of this kind of nonsense the vast majority of the time. I do think if this does well, I might do some more Cursed Book Club kind of videos. But yeah, Tuesdays and Saturdays, there's a new video from me, and I hope to see you in the next video. Bye.